The instrumental use of the history of slavery today also underlies the claim that slavery grew out of racism. For most of its long history, which includes most of the history of the human race, slavery was largely not the enslavement of racially different people, for the simple reason that only in recent centuries has either the technology or the wealth existed to go to another continent to get slaves and transport them en masse across an ocean. People were enslaved because they were vulnerable, not because of how they looked. The peoples of the Balkans were enslaved by fellow Europeans, as well as by the peoples of the Middle East, for at least 6 centuries before the first African was brought to the Western Hemisphere. Before the modern era, by and large, Europeans enslaved other Europeans, Asians enslaved other Asians, Africans enslaved other Africans, and the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere enslaved other indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. Slavery was not based on race, much less on theories about race. Only relatively late in history did enslavement across racial lines occur on such a scale as to promote an ideology of racism that outlasted the institution of slavery itself. Wherever a separate people were enslaved, they were disdained or despised, whether they were different by country, religion, caste, race, or tribe. In East Africa, the Maasai were feared slave raiders, and other African tribes, either alone or in conjunction with Arabs, enslaved their more vulnerable neighbors. As late as 1891, it was reported that Manyuema slavers had demoralized surrounding tribes, destroying crops, and famine reigned everywhere. Even in the early 20th century, Abyssinians were still raiding other Africans and carrying off slaves. It was 1922 before the British had gained sufficient control in Tanganyika to stamp out slavery there. Arabs were the leading slave raiders in East Africa, ranging over an area larger than all of Europe. The total number of slaves exported from East Africa during the 19th century has been estimated to be at least 2 million. The form in which the story of slavery has reached most people today has been along the lines of the best-selling book and widely watched television miniseries Roots by Alex Haley. Challenged on the historical accuracy of Roots, Haley said, "I tried to give my people a myth to live by." This instrumental use of history, or purported history, is open to the same objections as other instrumental myth-making. Despite the impression created by Roots, during the era of the massive slave trade from West Africa, a white man was more likely to catch malaria in Africa than to catch slaves himself. The average life expectancy of a white man in the interior of sub-Saharan Africa at that time was less than 1 year. By and large, men from Europe or the Western Hemisphere came to the coasts of Africa, bought their slaves, and left as soon as possible. Even so, the death rates among the white crews of the ships carrying slaves to the Western Hemisphere were as high as the death rates among the slaves themselves. It was only much later, after quinine and other medical measures enabled Europeans to survive where there were tropical diseases, was it possible for them to invade Africa in force and establish empires there. But by then, the Atlantic slave trade had already been ended. During the era of that trade, Africa was largely ruled by Africans, who established the conditions under which slave sales took place. The crew of a slave ship was in no position to defy African rulers and their armies by going out across the land and capturing people willy-nilly. The stronger African peoples captured and enslaved the weaker peoples, the same pattern found over the centuries in Europe, Asia, the Western Hemisphere, and Polynesia. In Nyasaland, the Ngoni and Yao swaggered over and terrorized other tribes. In Uganda, the Baganda made life miserable for their neighbors. And the Nyoro and Hima of Anko enslaved Toro women and children. The Tutsi dominated the Hutu in Rwanda, the Maasai lorded it over the Kikuyu and Kamba, and the latter, in turn, held the Indorobo in a kind of serfdom. It was precisely the fact that Europeans, except for the Portuguese, seldom participated in the raids that captured and enslaved Africans that enabled most people in Europe and the Americas to remain oblivious to the traumatic experience that this was, with some Africans committing suicide to avoid capture and wives being whipped as they tried to cling to their husbands or children. Historian David Breon Davis pointed out that Europeans had little contact with the actual process of enslavement, and that, as late as 1721, the Royal African Company asked its agents to investigate the modes of enslavement in the interior. Europeans typically saw only the end results, enslaved people being offered for sale on the coast. It was much the same story in the Ottoman Empire, where those who bought slaves had no idea what these slaves had been through before. The unique position of the Western world in the history, and especially the destruction of slavery, need not imply that there was unanimity within the West on this institution. In addition to whites who defended the enslavement of Africans on racial grounds, or who opposed general emancipation on social grounds, there were many whites, and even blacks, who defended slavery as a matter of self-interest as slave owners. Although most black owners of slaves in the United States were only nominal owners of members of their own families, there were thousands of other blacks in the antebellum South who were commercial slave owners, just like their white counterparts. An estimated 1/3 of the free persons of color in New Orleans were slave owners, and thousands of these slave owners volunteered to fight for the Confederacy during the Civil War. Black slave owners were even more common in the Caribbean. In short, there were many defenders of slavery in the West, even in the 19th century. And outside the West, slavery was too widely accepted to require defense. No other nation ended slavery in the same way as the United States did, and few ended it after so short a struggle, as history is measured. How and why did slavery end in most of the world? There were two major processes. Over the centuries, as more and more territories around the world consolidated into nation-states with their own armies and navies, raiding those territories to capture and enslave the people who lived within them became more hazardous in itself, and also risked military retaliation against the countries from which the raiders came. Thus, more and more peoples became off-limits to slave raiders over time. Put differently, the areas which remained subject to slave raiding over the centuries were primarily those where the people lived in smaller or weaker societies. Such societies continued to exist where it was difficult, for geographic or other reasons, to consolidate large areas under one government. This was true of the Balkans, the backwaters of Asia, and much of sub-Saharan Africa. By the early modern era, sub-Saharan Africa, with its numerous and severe geographic handicaps, was one of the last remaining areas from which vast numbers of people could be enslaved.
Welcome back to Breakdown Friday. Joseph Ward, Patrick Irvin, Professor Cartone Jones. I think Thomas Sowell think that we stupid. I think Thomas Sowell think that people don't know how to read and process information. Because he's the token black for the white people, and whatever he says goes. Because if you got that one black person that says it, then that's what it is. That's one of the things they use him for. But if you have studied the history of the slave trade in Africa and outside of Africa, you know damn well that none of this would have happened without the Europeans. The Arab slave trade wouldn't have happened without the Europeans. The spin that he's trying to put on it, he's trying to make it seem like this slave trade would have happened anyway. Like this is something that the Africans were doing anyway, and Europeans just came in and were just able to be benevolent benefactors of it. And it's no, all of the strife and the wars and the conflict that he named that black people or those Africans had against each other, white people was at the root of that. White people were the root cause of that. The white supremacy was the root cause of that. And it's just here go Thomas Sowell again with that afro, trying to, spitting this information. And then, it's crazy because I see black people on YouTube reacting to these videos and they be like, oh, I didn't know this. I didn't know this. Hey, man, yeah, you want to know why you didn't know it? Because you didn't never pick up a book. If you read Destruction of Black Civilization, you would know that, okay, you got us. All black people wasn't good. Dang. Nobody knew that. Like nobody in history knew that all black people wasn't good. Dang, we never had no. We didn't know that. We needed Thomas Sowell to tell us that, right? So yes, black people were involved in the slave trade, but the root of the slave trade, both transatlantic and the Arab slave trade, go to the Europeans and the Arabs. They were the instigators. They were the starters of that, right? Yes, African people had strife, tribalism, and even indentured servitude before the Europeans or any outsiders showed up. But the way they went about involving in that, the politics in that, was vastly different before the Europeans or the Arabs showed up. And we're going to get into that, man. We're going to get into that because Thomas Sowell, man, you be wilding, bro. You be wilding. Hey, man, so, I just like the way everything reflecting off them glasses right now. He looked like he ready to cook. He got his proverbial apron on, his proverbial chef hat. You be able to get your bowl. I got my bowl ready and my spoon because he about to cook. So, and he's the, I'm a historian, Pat is a historian, but he's the historian of us. And so we want to start off with him so we can set this foundation right. So, PC, man, you heard the bull jive. I'm saying it sharp. You heard the bull jive spewing out of his mouth. So what are your thoughts about what Thomas Sowell was saying, the angle that he was trying to spin on the role of the Africans in the transatlantic slave trade and the Arab slave trade?
Well, what I didn't hear is make sure that you like, share, and subscribe.
There you go. Yeah, like, share, subscribe to this channel right now because we're doing some great work over here. Please.
All right. And get active in the comment section. So what I heard was the revisionist history of the transatlantic slave trade, where it sort of like softened the blow of what actually took place and what happened. So what you take partial truths, right? Yes, there were Africans who were involved in the slave trade, but let's not make it seem like Africa itself wasn't targeted by not just the Asians, not just the Arabs, but also the Europeans. And they had been warring on Africa for thousands of years, trying to get access to their resources. And through the benevolent nature of a lot of the Northern Africans, they saw themselves as teachers, prophets, and they lived in a land of abundance. So a lot of times they would invite those in there, and the Greek scholars would even tell you that they sat at the feet of African teachers and African prophets before they went back to Greece and created their own folklore. So, but there was also the mixture of the race, which actually, we call them the tragic mulattoes, right? And those generations of people who then weren't so loyal to the rest of the tribes that they were a part of, and so they played a role in allowing for destabilization of those nations and invasions that took place, because the Arab slave trade was first and longest, and the Arabs learned that they didn't want their children, they didn't want their women mixing with the brothers, so they castrated them in the Arab slave trade.
Yep.
And so it was a far more brutal point. I mean, to the point where, it wasn't what happened when tribes had warfare. Typically speaking, if you lost to a tribe, you wasn't necessarily in bondage.
Right.
You just now you became under the leadership of that new tribe.
And you still had your autonomy.
Right. And it was literally, you blended in with the people.
Right.
So the way that he breaks it down is like, well, everybody was doing it. Well, but it wasn't to the state of the brutality of the European slave trade. And in terms of the transatlantic slave trade. And this was the first one that was specifically done based on race. The chattel slave was specifically done based on race. And it was the one that was specifically, you had baby making factories, slave making factories. Specifically down in the place we call the PG County area of like Maryland. You had slave making factories where they took the women, and this is where the whole concept around buck breaking really gets in terms of having the teenage boys sleeping with their mothers, sleeping with their sisters when she has her first period, so they can reproduce and manufacture more African slaves for the plantations, and also to sell on the marketplace. So we truly don't even know the full brutality of what happened, because it's all every single story that's been told about the transatlantic slave trade has watered down the amount of damage that was done to Black people. But when if we really want to think about it, Thomas Sowell embraces European culture.
Right.
He speaks from a Eurocentric lens. That in itself should tell you about how damaging slavery was to Black people in America, because now Black people have to we had to rediscover who we were and recreate a culture based around being a newly created species of man and woman. And in terms of the mixing and blending of bloodlines and from different African kingdoms and tribes. So that in itself speaks to the damage that was done. No other place in history have a people gotten to a place where they had to throw away their history, or they had to disavow their history, or their history was stripped from them. Their religions were stripped from them. Their spiritual systems were stripped from them. Their languages were stripped from them. Even their customs were stripped from them, to the point where they were pretty much a blank slate and to be imprinted on by the dominating culture, to the point where you lost all access to your culture. There were no book burnings to destroy the lineage or the history of our past. You didn't need to. You destroyed the griots. You destroyed you punished them. You limited their ability to even learn your language for a certain amount of time. So I just think that I'm not tired of Thomas Sowell. I'm tired of that man. I'm tired of dude and the ilks of him, because they themselves are walking around ashamed of who they are, and they're trying to legitimize and justify something else, and they do so because it provides him with a lifestyle that he's gotten accustomed to. Yep. And when I say lifestyle, that includes the checks that he's gotten. That includes being able to go around the country and spew this rhetoric. It includes the ability from the right books. And the scary part wasn't he an economist?
Yeah. Yeah. Does that include knee pads and baby oil too?
He might have been at a Puffy party.
Yeah.
but because we keep like this economist,
right,
is stepping out of his element.
If you know a little bit about something, you know a little bit about everything. You're an expert, rather.
Yeah, that's the part I have a problem with. Too many times they get crowned as experts. We got psychology experts. We got historical experts. All these people are experts in something other than what they supposedly, were trained in. So I'll just land my plane, man.
I'm a psychology expert too. So
me too, shit.
but Thomas Sowell is full of it. And if you actually study history, study African history, study American history, study the history of the slave trade, like, it's not hiding that Black people around or throughout the African diaspora were involved on the European side of the slave trade. And you know, the title of the video for him is Facts About Slavery You Didn't Learn in School. Well, I mean, so people who didn't know this was supposed to teach us this. But because you know, remembering Black people, we're charging ourselves to learn this at home. Stop expecting the people at school who already don't know this to teach your kids this. You know, so I want to throw that out. But Pat, man, what are your thoughts on the spin that Thomas Sowell is putting on the history of the slave trade?
I think he's doing a real good job of taking the bullets out of a narrative that is causing white supremacy, white America, increased amount of frustration right at this current moment in time. It's not like they're really bothered or threatened, but they are like annoyed with us right now. And you know, I think he's always, like, I won't say always, but as far as I've known him, he's been somebody that's been effective at taking the bullets out of the gun, because people don't study the facts and people do think in terms of absolutes. They think North good, South bad. They think Black slave, white slave owner. Like, they don't understand that we live in a world filled with nuance. Unless they're talking about themselves, and then they understand, like, nah, but it ain't as simple as you making it. But with regards to anything else, it's white. Pretty simple.
It don't matter if it's Black or white.
Right. That type of stuff, right? You know, and you hear it. Like, I'm glad you said that. You hear it in all of the little colloquialisms and the songs and the jargon and the phrases and all of this other stuff. When it don't matter if you're Black or white, and race is only skin deep, and we all bleed red, and all of them other things. Social constructs, and everywhere around us, people are trying to simplify things that should not be simplified. They're trying to make complex things simple, and they're trying to make nuanced things black and white. And I think he does a good job at muddying the waters, which I think is his only intention, really, is to create confusion, is to like remove the self-righteousness out of it. Like, you don't get to feel powerfully right because you're not sure about this now that I've presented this. And so I think that, like, that's what his purpose is. He would say, assuming he believes his rhetoric, he would say he's trying to expose Black people to the truth so that we can stop focusing on all of the wrong things. And then you would get into this discussion with him about, well, what are the wrong things? Like, what are these, right? Like, and then they say, well, maybe instead of focusing on how white people have done us wrong, we should focus on how we can build ourselves up. And then you would say, okay, well, how does what you're presenting help us do that? Well, it gets us to stop focusing on what they've done wrong. Race doesn't really matter. And then you say, okay, well, if race doesn't matter, how do you explain the prevalence of race when you start looking at demographic outcomes, socioeconomic outcomes? How do you explain that?
Oh, his explanation is gangster rap.
Right. And then, and again, he does a real good job of muddying the waters, because by saying gangster rap, now it's gangster rap is a problem. But then you go into, okay, who promotes it? Who promotes gangster rap? Who's distributing it? Who's encouraging people to make it? Who are the predominant consumers of it? These are not Black people in any of those categories. But as long as he can keep muddying the waters, as long as he can keep Black people confused and unsure, like, what does it matter how many Black people own slaves if the beneficiaries of the system were white? It doesn't matter. What does it matter? Here's a question for you. How many Black people own white slaves? like that's that. Now, if you could present that, I would be like, huh, okay, let me. But saying, nah, don't too. All right. Well, I'm glad that we know that. America also had Benedict Arnold. You know what I'm saying? Like we know. Like if you go to the Holocaust, the Jews had the capos in their centers. These were Jewish. Yeah, every single population, every group has people that are looking to benefit themselves at the expense of their group. That's where group dynamics, group psychology plays in a part where if your group is powerful and my group is weak, I'm willing to sell out my group to gain status in your group. It's a survival mechanism.
Remember, we did one of the breakdowns we did about the diaspora wars when the African girl admitted that they come over here to try to side with the Europeans so they can get the resources.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Dr. Claude Anderson has been giving the same lecture for 45 years. And in that lecture, he talks, I don't know if it's actually been 45 years for somebody fact check me, I don't know. But it feels like it's been at least 70 years. But he's been giving the same lecture for 105 years, and a key part of that lecture is meritorious manumission.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea, this narrative that black people own slaves, and then like PC wonderfully, beautifully pointed out, we're playing words with friends now too, because slave in terms of what we experience at the hands of white folk, and slave in terms of what Africans experience at the hands of other Africans,
it's different.
It's not the same. So we still playing words with friends here. Okay, we still playing word games. Got you. So I understand it. He landed on a triple word score, and he just running the board up. I get it. His Scrabble game is immaculate. But I understand. Like when I look at it from the standpoint of his point is to confuse people about your point. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have a point on his own. His whole point is to confuse people about what you're saying. Yeah. And so but the sad part for me is it works every time.
Yes. It works for people who, once again, are allergic to books and reading and learning. Because I've seen plenty of black people on YouTube reacting to Thomas Sowell videos, and then was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I've never learned this." Well, maybe because your ass have never opened a book,
But, so that's a cultural thing too, Joe. But that goes back to what I was saying before about the fact that when your history in terms of who you are and your culture has been stripped from you, one thing we always marvel about is the brilliance of black people. And one of the things that makes us brilliant is as Pat always points out, YouTube is our ability to adapt. And we have adapted to this culture where we care more about the Europeans in America and abroad than we do about our own culture. When you hear about black people bragging about going on vacation, they typically talk about going to Europe. They want to go to all the different places in Paris and France. They even want to go to damn Germany. Like, you know what I'm saying? So I think that too plays a role in the why, because they probably read, they just ain't interested in reading about us.
Well, stop complaining about us. Could that be my thing? We can't keep complaining about the enemy but not want to read.
Joe. See. There's a benefit to profiting off of the victim narrative. There's a benefit to it because there are black people out here, who don't associate with other blacks, but they go to white liberals and they, appeal to their so-called better nature. And then so it's a double-edged sword. I'm going to give the money to this Negro who's not going to do anything for black people. That Negro is going to accept it in the name of black people, knowing damn well he's not going to do it. It's going to be the vicious cycle in which black people never get anything from that, from the experience.
Right.
So But what you're saying is true in terms of they don't read. I just don't think they care to read. And you don't. What are they tethered to?
Yes.
People without knowledge of themselves and history is like a tree without roots. Now, we know what grows without roots. You know, I happen to like mushrooms, but they're fungus. You know what I'm saying?
You know, Pat like fungus. Talk about fungus now.
Damn.
Read between the lines, my guy.
Wow.
Hold on. You remember that fungi breakdown? One of them breakdowns. Yeah, the whole fungi breakdown.
I do remember the fungus breakdown. I forgot about that. You can still read between the lines, though.
No, but I'm sorry. Go ahead, Peace.
Yeah, you interrupt the PC. Not a food ain't good.
See, got fungus in it.
Now we gotta reheat the pot. So, but you know, because I when you look at it and you break it down, like y'all was saying before, man, the whole concept of generalities, and we're thinking of them as absolutes. Yeah, we had a lot of blacks in Louisiana, but they were like considered quadroons and octoroons, and so they were more so focused on being Creole than they were being black. They were of the same ilk of the ones who backdoored Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Dessalines and Haiti. You know, you had a bunch of Christophs over there. So they wanted to blend in with what they would consider, what did they call that society back then? Victorian society here in America. And so they wanted to blend in and do all those different things. What makes Thomas Sowell, and Thomas Sowell is very dangerous, is that he's given this platform. And one of the things he does with the platform is while spewing this rhetoric, it becomes foundational for white supremacist talking points.
Yep.
And just like what was the pale girl that used to think she was the next Kevin Samuels?
Pearlie.
When she got into trouble,
Thomas Sowell said
she was quoting Thomas Sowell.
All them Charlie Kirk, all them what Thomas Sowell said.
And that there you go, right there is right there, live in living color. You get to see the danger of what that produces, because we become expendable because of how our public image is being displayed.
Right.
And the Thomas Sowells make it so sensible. Oh, black people, we didn't have it that bad. And so when they rewrite the history books and they're talking about black people were involuntary workers or involuntary immigrants,
right?
And then they talk about like how black people profited off of slavery, and how if black people didn't have slavery, we wouldn't have the skills that we have today. And it's like when you can continuously do that, you can consistently legitimize the lynchings, you can consistently legitimize the red line, and you can consistently legitimize the removing our ability to build wealth, and you can legitimize every aspect that takes advantage of us as a people.
No, exactly. But so great, because it bridges to what I'm three points. So he starts off like, okay, everybody was slaves. Basically, they're telling us black people get a ticket and get in line because everybody was slaves. And the slavery that happened to you is no more different than the slavery that happened to other people, which is why he comes back and say slavery was not based on race until the 1600s. Like that actually matters. Africa was still being ravaged by the Europeans before then. It doesn't matter. Okay, now slavery is based on race. And then they'll be like, well, the first person in America to have chattel slaves was a black man, right? But the court system awarded him that. The white court system awarded him that. You know, that these we keep forgetting that. And like you were like y'all said earlier, slavery looked different before the Europeans showed up and the slave trade really ratcheted up. Yes. Africans in the beginning, Africans were selling slaves into the transatlantic slave trade and not really understanding what was going on. As the slave trade went on, a lot of them understood what was going on, and they decided to be sellouts, and they decided to profit from the slave trade. Some were forced into it by fear, and they wanted to keep their people safe, so they would rather raid everybody else, but they were still in danger of being enslaved themselves. And other ones just wanted to enrich themselves. Like you can look up Tipple Tip, Tippu Tip. Tipple Tip was a well-known and well-documented and glorified mixed race. I think he was African. He was Afro-Omanian. He was an Afro-Omanian slave trader, big slave trader, right? So we know that these you got groups of Africans who've done it. We know about the Dahomey Empire. We know about other African empires that engaged in this slave trade even after understanding what was going on. But let's get back to the larger point. How do they have a system to send those Africans into? Why did they have that system? Because he talked about, Thomas Sowell talked about the raids, the slave raids that went on, and most of Europeans didn't get into the interior of Africa. So basically it's trying to make it say that all that stuff that was going on, it was on the Africans. All the Europeans did was just picking up slaves and taking them off, but the Africans did all the dirty work. All we did was just, get our slaves and go. No, there was a whole system that you all put in place for this to happen. These things were not happening this way before the Europeans showed up. These things were not happening this way before the Arabs showed up. So stop. Well, we understand why he's saying what he's saying. But once again, he's talking to us like we dumb. If you really listen to Thomas Sowell, he said a lot of nothing and stretching the truth.
Yeah. Go ahead, Pat. I'm sorry, because I've been talking.
No, I was just gonna even the assertion about the first slave owner and the first states, but no, I'm not gonna let anybody slide by John Punch. To my knowledge, that's the first state-sponsored slavery. And I know he was an indentured servitude that was basically sentenced to being in indentured servitude for life, which we want to play words with friends again. He was an indentured servant for his natural life, not a slave. But what is that is a slave.
That is a slave. If you have no freedom, no autonomy, you can't. There's no ending to this. You are a slave.
So, and that situation happened once again. He tried to escape indentured servitude with two white men. They both got an additional year added on to their indentured servitude, and he was sentenced to indentured servitude for the rest of his natural life.
Right.
So. And that was in 1640, which to my knowledge, I know that everybody like to point to Anthony Johnson, which there's some whatever about whether or not he actually existed. But even if we're gonna say he did exist, he didn't get his come up with his slaves until he got his freedom and all of that in 1650.
Right.
It was 10 years after John Punch.
Right.
So go ahead.
But just even to that point, why was Anthony Johnson even able to have the legs to stand on to do what he did, to have not only to own black slaves, but to go to court and win a court case, to have these people serve him for the rest of their lives? Well, he didn't create that system.
And this is where we go back to again. Like I said, the whole point of me bringing that up was y'all not going y'all keep trying to slip stuff in. No, John Punch was first, and he was a black dude owned by a white dude, and that's the narrative. It's not about who owned who. We understand black people could own other black people, and we're not saying that's right either. It's the system that was in place at the time. But that's why I asked the question I asked. Show me where a black person owned a white person. Show me that.
Right. But that's a great point, because he also goes into the Native Americans owning black slaves and people in the Caribbean being able to own black slaves, but you're not telling us that white people were able to be enslaved in the same manner as African people were. So you full of shit.
I mean, even to that, we know, like, hey, it's gonna make a lot of women mad, but white women own slaves, and before they say they could only own, no, white women that got divorced from their husbands, there were court cases where they sued their husband
for slaves,
for ownership of their slaves, and they won.
Martha Washington had more slaves than George Washington.
Yeah, they retained ownership of their property. In this case, we're talking about people, slaves, but we're going to say property because there's this other narrative that white women couldn't own anything. No, everybody was allowed to own black people. Nobody was allowed to own white people. And that is, to me, where this is what we're talking about here. Like, if everybody could own everybody, then I might be like, having this conversation. Hey, white people might be right to tell us, hey, y'all need to simmer down because y'all can do it to us too.
If chattel slavery was equal to everybody was able to be a chattel slave to everybody, we wouldn't be having these conversations.
Right. And this is where I think we really, like, with all of this, I throw it all out the window because for me, it goes right back to that simple thing. The moment somebody can show me where a black person or anybody, but we're going to say a black person was able to own a white person and treat them the same way that white people were able to treat black people during chattel slavery, I will sit back. But until such thing is proven to me, white people got to hold his L, and all of the black people that agree with him, y'all can hold it with him.
And whoever didn't line up Thomas Sowell Afro got to take his L too. So, but you know, I wanted to. I'm being petty too, but I want to. Another thing is, you know, the gangster rap. I ain't gonna. It is messing with me because once again, Thomas Sowell think we dumb. So. He makes the argument a lot that, and it's not necessarily in this video, but if you watch Thomas Sowell, he talks about gangster rap being the bane of the black existence a lot. And so the idea is black culture didn't become degenerate, or black culture didn't have disparities, or black culture didn't have these negative outcomes before gangster rap, and everything it's the music that we create for ourselves and we listen for ourselves that is causing the destruction of the communities, the families, and everything that is happening in Black America. But if you just go read and you just go look at it, Black America was already in decline before the first rap song was ever made.
Over 100 years prior to, W.E.B. Du Bois talks about the Philadelphia Negro. And he talked about the terrible conditions that Black people were growing up in the poverty, and what that led to. When you create an impoverished community and you lock them in, you create, situations where you're going to have higher numbers of crime. You want to have higher numbers of victims and things of that nature. And being from the city where the first gangster rap was ever produced, I can say that he's. It's
that audio too.
No, it was Schoolie D.
Yeah.
One of the things that, and you see this in terms of political debates, where you don't know what they're going to debate topics, but once they start debating the topics, then that's when people become involved in the topic in terms of their investment. So I can just pull up and say, dirty sneakers are the reason why, we get into fights in the community. Now, somebody might say, no, well, clean sneakers are the reason because everybody wants the clean sneakers. Now we can have a whole debate on whether or not it's clean sneakers or dirty sneakers. But the bottom line is neither one of them have anything to do with the conditions of the community. And so while I won't say that gangster rap wasn't influencing in terms of the types of lifestyles expanding on the gangland culture into other cities and things of that nature, we have to really look at I think you said earlier, Pat, who promoted gangster rap?
White
The
folk.
purpose of gangster rap.
White folk.
What were they also invested in? You know, the prison industrial complex. This is also, I mean, there was so many other things going on. The war on drugs, the 1994 crime bill that was written and coined by Bill Clinton was the president who signed it, but the last president, Jim Crow Joe Biden, was the one who penned it and coined it. You had a lot of different things going on, and so it was gangster rap actually was a symptom of the times in a lot of the cases for us. You know, when you understand how easy it is to point the finger at teenagers and cats in their early 20s and blame them for the circumstances of an entire community, that's irresponsible, especially when they weren't the ones managing it. They weren't the ones who dictated what was said. There were plenty of times I've seen articles. T.I. is the one that sticks out because I remember reading an article where he said once he got out of jail, he wanted to do family-friendly music.
Nope.
And the record label told him, nah, you need to get out there and talk about guns and women and being in the club. And so, and
it's an industry.
It's an entire industry. And there's not enough time to even really get into, like I said before, this is the dangerous rhetoric of a Thomas Sowell, of a Jesse Lee Peterson.
Yeah. And now Officer Tatum, all them.
It's because it really, if you don't know enough, it can be very convincing that this is the core problem when it's not the core problem. It is a problem, but it's not the root of the problem. And when you can sort of like soften the blow on the community that was responsible for the problem by saying, yeah, you know, they were slave owners, slave drivers, and so, but it wasn't so bad because everybody was doing it.
Nah.
It's like saying everybody was on drugs, but you know, you know, so crack ain't so bad. I mean, look at you, you smoke weed. Oh, there's a little difference between crack and weed, buddy.
If slavery wasn't so bad, how about you try it? Let's enslave you for a significant amount of time since it ain't so bad. So you can tell everybody about your experience and how it wasn't so bad. But nobody would sign up for that. I wonder why. I wonder why. The mixed, both of you brought up the especially PC, you brought up the mulattoes. And that was a great point. And I'm glad you brought that up about the mulattoes, because even going back to destruction of Black civilization, of course, you know, we're reading it right now, but it talks about the role that those mulattoes or those octoroons or those mixed race people, the role they play, because for the majority of the time, a lot of them, they take on the ideology of their fathers, who are the Europeans or the Arabs. And so they become a danger to the total population because they can mix in with the total population. And that's that meritorious manumission right there in hand. And so that group of people has to be looked at. Historically, you got to be able to look at it, have to look at that group, because they have members, you know, some bad apples spoil the bunch. So yeah, it happens. But when it comes to Black people protecting ourselves and understanding what's going on, but also he tried to use the roots angle as well. Well, you know, Alex Haley talked about slavery in the roots, and hey man, once again, anybody who know how to read know that Alex Haley plagiarized that story, right? And says what Roots did was alert Black people to the brutality and the reality of slavery, not necessarily saying the narrative itself was true, but the brutality and the reality of enslavement to Black people. It opened a lot of Black people's eyes to that. Nobody's saying we need to take Roots and run home with it, even though it made Roots for a long time. Roots was the movie for black folk. You know, when it came on, you watched it every year and all these things here. But as we got older and we learned more, you know, when you learn, you do better and you move better. But once again, it's him using innocuous stuff to water down the point and to get people saying, like Pat was saying, get people to like really questioning Black history and having sting behind why Black history shouldn't be taught in school and all these lies because it's not taught right and all these things here. But it's just Thomas Sowell. I ain't gonna lie, Thomas Sowell pissed me off a little bit because it just because it's the amount of people that just listen to what he's saying. So I know I'm rambling a bit, but
no, you're not. But I think it's frustrating to me because I gotta. So we're and Black people are funny, like because we get mad at Roots for being a plagiarized story, and we get mad at the letter. I forget the letter, the creation of a slave, the Willie Lynch letter, because there's some speculation that wasn't accurate, and there seems to be a growing consensus that wasn't a real document.
It don't matter if it was real or not,
right? And that's the part that frustrates me, because we act like because these items, these specific documents, have some dubiousness to their origin stories. We act like that discounts the message and the meaning behind them. You really think Johnny Appleseed planted all the apple trees in America? Is that what we really believe? Do we really believe that the so-called president never told a lie? Do we really believe that a lot of these stories that are passed on as a part of American folklore, American tradition, American heritage, do we believe that these stories are all rooted in truth? Or are we allowed to understand that these stories aren't necessarily rooted in truth, but they're conveying an aspect of cultural development that we want to hang on to, which is what Roots is, which is right. What the Willie, and I get it. I'm one of those people as well. When in my younger years, I was just as frustrated as everybody else. But now that I'm older and I think about it differently and I can put it in perspective,
does it matter?
It doesn't matter.
The impact.
There's an essence of truth to even the Willie Lynch letter. If we could say, well, it's not a real letter, nobody ever wrote it. True. But when you read that thing, there's a message in that letter that lines up, that tells a story, that accurately portrays a picture that really lines up with what really happened. That's why it resonates so well. That's why it keeps sticking around, because it speaks to a mindset that we know existed. Like you said, the impact, the reason why Roots resonates. And really, y'all should really want us to lock in on Roots, because the truth, from what I know from reading actual slave narratives, is so much worse than Roots is. So y'all should want us to really lock in on Roots. Y'all should not be trying to get us to think Roots isn't accurate, because now you leave a hole. Now we're going to look for something real. And what's real is a lot worse than this particular false story. So it gets to be interesting to me, because it also speaks to the double standard in the way that we judge our culture. Another iteration of the black tax, right? Like, our stories have to be 100% factual, 100% at all levels, not just in terms of the actual historical facts, dates, names, places, times, events, but also in terms of the distribution networks. Everybody along the distribution channel has to be 100% stand up. If anybody tells 100% story, and we find out that this person was at some point 75% in their life, it disregards the 100% story they told. If I stand up here right now and tell you 100% factual historical event about a black person that existed 73 years ago, and then you find out that I plagiarized a line in a book that I wrote 15 years from now, they'll throw out the story. Like, and so we do that with ourselves. We don't do that with other people. And that's the part that frustrates me. And that's the part that I see where we're looking at the Thomas Sowell. This is how he's muddying the waters. That is the tactic he's using to make things not line up. Right. He's capitalizing on our intellectual laziness through the utilization of his own intellectual manipulation, disingenuousness, his intellectual attacks. You know what I'm saying? His maliciousness in terms of his intellectual expression. All of these things are capitalizing on our intellectual laziness. They cast that dubiousness in because we do have this black tax that we charge to every facet of the game. And that's one part where it's like, all right, we do have to start. I think the Destruction of Civilizations is a wonderful book. The most wonderful part of that book to me is when he declares that the black scholars nowadays no longer have space to allow people to interpret their work.
Right.
You have to present your findings as the findings that they are, and then you have to interpret those findings. Now, why would this man say this in the 80s? Again, we going back to why are things happening? He's saying this in the 80s because even then, we didn't have the ability to properly analyze what we were consuming. And so if we didn't have it then, and we're the children of those people, we damn sure don't have it now. So now it's like, how do we get it back? How do we combat a Thomas Sowell when he can just say, well, if you go and listen to one of Joe's podcasts from 5 years ago, he said that white women ain't got no butt. And here's an example of a white woman with a booty. So clearly everything he says can't be trusted.
Yeah. Craziness. So he said those who brought slaves had no idea what the slaves went through on the interior. That's the same thing as saying, well, those who selling dope don't really know what's going on after they buy the dope. So, it ain't really their fault. Like, you still complicit, fool. You're a part of the problem. You're the main part of the problem. So you just gonna boo-boo in your hand, throw it at me, and then run, and then act like you ain't do it. So I'm stank because of my own will, but I didn't boo-boo on myself. I ain't got no boo-boo on my hand, but you got it all on your hands. But I'm stank on my own will. Just pee on me and tell me it's raining.
Well, I guess we shouldn't blame the people that dropped the girls off to the Diddy party.
Right. Yeah, it's only the fault of the people who was at the Diddy party.
Fatality.
That's what happened when you ain't got
no. That's what he said. Yeah, that's what he's saying. I guess we shouldn't be mad at the parents that sold their children to R. Kelly.
Right. Oh, hold on, man. Hold on.
Might have to drop a dime on this. Sure. You know what I'm saying? Stop.
Hey, I'm glad you got that. That's my movie.
I don't like that shit.
I don't like that.
I don't like that. Hey, they didn't know what was going on in R. Kelly basement.
Right. They did. They had no idea. All they did was drop them off and pick them up. That's it.
We could just keep playing this game. Like what are we doing?
You know what I'm talking about? Hey, look, I didn't break into his house. The door was open. And I just so happened, since the door was open, I just thought that all this stuff was just free to take. So, I just took it. Because if he wouldn't have left his door open, nobody wouldn't have took his stuff.
Hey, man, look, I'll do you one better. I saw them get in the argument, and I saw homie pull out the gun and shoot him. But I ain't know what the bullet was going to do inside his body.
True, yeah.
I ain't got nothing to do with that.
Because the dude who shot him not responsible for the bullet. You right.
Yeah, ain't nobody know what the bullet was. That's between the bullet and his organs. We don't know what they was.
I'm just saying, because what was going on in the interior of his body? Who knows? You know,
Crazy word.
hey man, yeah, it's just like, brother, like I just can't believe people really think this dude is an intellectual. Now, you know, back in the day, I haven't looked at his economic work, so you know, I'm sure he has some type of intelligence.
Well, wait,
sure.
Joe, he's an intellectual. He's
Of
just
course. He a dumbass.
We don't agree with him.
But I'm just saying, because like I've been listening to a lot of him lately, right? Because I've been like picking which week we're gonna do some Thomas Sowell, but it's just like I've been listening to him half-ass answer questions. Like people ask him, like somebody ask him a direct question about black people, the plight of black people, or something that's going on, and well, it's gangster rap's fault, and then half explain why it's gangster rap's fault. It's like you talking in circles, and it sounds intelligent to people who don't know better. We know better. That's why we pulling your card.
You do a hell of a Thomas Sowell impression, bro. But what it is, and I deal with these kind of people too all the time, is when somebody thinks they're smarter than you, they feel like they really don't have to answer the question. They just think that they can just talk in enough circles to convince you that they know what they're talking about. And for the majority of the time, when they're talking, they really don't have the answer. But because they speak with such authority, it sounds like they have the answer. So confidence will take you a long way in life. If you're truly confident about what you say, it'll take you a long way in life. And I think that one of the things that we're learning is that what they say, you can't bullshit.
Hey.
You got a lot of bleeps that you know.
Oh, good. I got my time.
See you writing them down. So, I think because Pat, you hit on something, and I used to think about it, but I forgot that I thought about it. Right when you said that the things we choose to critique, and then we want to make sure, like it's like as soon as you say something that actually puts black people in like our experience in a proper perspective, that's when the critiques of black folk come out of the woodworks, and they want to dissect it, and they really are just looking for one thing wrong. They ain't looking for the whole. They just need one reason to discredit what you're talking about, and they hang on that, and it bothers me because, as we spoke before, as you said, white folk live off the lore of their history, off the lore of their story, and they choose what to believe. They choose what to believe, even if they know it's a lie. They choose it because the narrative is something that's beneficial for their community and their nation.
Yep.
We choose to discredit all those things, and then we need to keep it so real that we insist that our musicians keep it real. And so they're out there dropping bombs on each other. And we're like, you know, and we're in the comment sections talking about how real they are. But at the same time, it's supposed to be entertainment. You know, so, and I'm saying that to say, we have a lot of work to do to try to get to young folk and get them out of that mindset of not understanding the importance of the propaganda that benefits you. You know, if the propaganda benefits you, then shut the up and just let the propaganda do what it's supposed to do. Right. Because we got cats out here that are doing revisionist history with propaganda is not so weak, but we won't challenge it.
Because they don't know no better.
Well, because and since we don't challenge it, it grows in power. Like the people who you say in the comment section were awestruck by things Thomas Sowell was saying. But that's the type of should critique. That's the type of stuff you should be combing through with a fine-tooth comb. But we don't do it.
But they be like, oh my God, I can't believe I've never learned this in school. And I'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe you walk around with a computer in your pocket and you don't use it. Yeah.
Crazy.
So, but also the Royal African Company, the Dutch West India Company, the Compagnie du Cap Vert et du Senegal are just three of the prominent slave trading companies. The Royal African Company out of Britain, the Dutch West Company out of the Netherlands, and then the Vert et du Senegal out of France. These are just three of the slave trading companies that existed, right? So slave trading, like European, because I typed in how many European companies were involved in the slave trade. And it was like, according to historical records, several major European countries, including Portugal, Britain, France, the Netherlands, Spain, Denmark, Sweden, were significantly involved in the slave trade, meaning numerous companies from each of these nations participated in the Atlantic slave trade. And we keep forgetting, like, the involvement, the large involvement of Portugal. The Portuguese at one point dominated the slave trade. 55% of the slaves, they were taken out. And then that was followed by the British, and then the French, and then the Dutch, and then the French. It was like, and then, you know, the Spanish had that part in there too. But
don't forget the Germans.
Yeah, the Germans.
Yeah,
the Germans had that part too.
Yeah.
But it's like none of these, like, these companies couldn't have happened if it was something going on in Africa that was just purely an African thing. Like, why would the Africans allow the Europeans to come in and take over and get a part of that? Like, that don't even make sense.
Well, the African empires were at that time pretty much falling apart, and they were at the end of dynasties. I mean,
they've been fighting for thousands of years. And in addition to that, the Europeans, when they came in, like, we talk about Africans selling slaves, but we don't tell the whole story. So if I come in and I say I'm bearing gifts, you give me gold and I'll give you guns. Now you got one tribe that say, okay, we got guns. Then you go to the other nation and then they say, well, hey, yo, you gave them guns. I got the same gold. What's up? And then they say, we don't want gold. We want your people. Whoever you defeat in war, just give us those people and you can have the guns. And that's the tricky nature of a lot of what happened. And then the total decimation of those warring tribes, because now you have more powerful weapons that doesn't do a lot more damage. There's a lot fewer survivors. And then when all your warriors are damaged or hurt or harmed, then who's going to stop the invaders from coming in? Yeah.
Because the Europeans eventually did make it into Africa.
And in the interior, and they took over Africa.
Right. So, you know, tell the whole damn story, homie.
Yeah, trying to make it seem like it was some purely African thing, and the Europeans were just able to come in and benefit off of it. No, none of that was happening in Africa like that before they showed up.
I mean, malaria ain't stopped them from getting into the interior either.
And the malaria didn't stop the slave trade.
Right. So, I mean, their descendants are still there.
Stop it. Stop it, Thomas. Uncle Tom. Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah. Hey, man. Make sure y'all like this video, comment, subscribe, and share. We're just about revealing the truth and making sure we're not fooling ourselves and purposely being duped by somebody just because their skin color the same as yours. We know all skin ain't kin. And especially if they got that old 1970s afro with no edge up in 2025. So I'm just saying. But Joseph Ward, Patrick Irvin, Professor Carl Tone Jones, make sure you check out fatlifestation.com. You know, the link is in the description. Also, the link for the PAX Inc., thepax.org is in the description. Of course, you know, On the Shoulders One, make sure you check it out. PC, you want to give some shout outs?
Oh yeah, man. You know, I want to shout out to some people who have been extremely generous in regards to you know, taking care of a brother. So I'm just want to say the initials. I'm not sure if they want their names out there. Miss Tate. I'm just gonna say Miss Tate. I appreciate you.
I already said their names.
Okay, well, Cheryl Tate, thank you so much. Appreciate you, sister. And me, Kim, as always.
Yes.
Always.
We appreciate everybody who is supporting all of our platforms and everything we do. You know, we come here to collaborate, but all of our platforms that we have, we appreciate everybody who's continuously supporting all the patrons, all the Cash Apps, all the PayPals, everything y'all do. We appreciate you. Remember, it's going back into what we're doing in the community. We're not taking this money and running away with it. We're putting it into what we're doing in our community, and we're not just talking. We're doing it. We got proof. So that's
the same. Cheryl Tate,
you the real you, me, Kim, and everybody. Y'all some real ones. We appreciate you all. All right, and catch y'all on the other side.